Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 8 of my Witchwood card reveal. Ton of new legendaries this time around, including my favorite card of the set so far, both from a fantasy standpoint, but also from, I think, maybe a power level standpoint. That's right. So let's go ahead and jump into this. If you don't have time, you can hit the link in the description to go to my quick reviews at the end. Where you'll just get the cards and some really quick ratings. You can also stay here right now as we jump into my detailed reviews. So up first here we have a brand new Priest Legendary. This is Chameleos, a new 1 mana 1/1 minion for Priest. It reads, each turn this is in your hand, transform it into a card that your opponent is holding. And I'm just going to spoil it right now. This is my favorite card in the Witchwood so far. First off, the fantasy of this, the idea, the theme of it is amazing. It's like a thief priest sort of card that fits perfectly into the Witchwood as well. It's a chameleon, of course, so it changes into your opponent's cards. That is fantastically wonderful. But I also think this card is incredibly strong. And I've caught some early reactions from some people in my, Twitch subscriber Discord and a couple posts on Reddit already. And I'm not sure everybody is quite so sold on Chameleos as I am, but I think it's amazing. Because here's the deal with Chameleos. This is not like a Mind Vision style card, if that's how you're thinking of this right away. It's like, oh, this is just a Thought Stealer, a Mind Vision where you get one of your opponent's cards and then you use it, and it probably doesn't synergize that well with your deck. That is not what Chameleos is to me. Chameleos is the ultimate scouting advantage. You basically get free information over your opponent throughout the course of a game as soon as you draw Chameleos. And if you, for instance, get him in your mulligan, you can just keep him ready to go for the rest of the game and start to build this just enormous informational asset over your opponent. So you can start to track their hand with incredible accuracy. Now, of course, Chameleos doesn't necessarily show a different card each time, so it can get some diminishing returns. But basically, even if you're playing against aggro, or especially if you're playing against control, you can start to see exactly what cards they have access to. And then once they play that card, you realize it's gone, and you can start to narrow in on precisely what their hand is going to be. Now, you'll probably always be missing a few cards here and there. Against bigger decks in particular, you might not know half their hand, even 5 or 10 turns in. You just might not get everything. But still, occasionally you're going to say, okay, whoa, they have Sunkeeper Tarim. I'm playing against a Paladin. I absolutely have to make sure he has a clear board going into turn 6. Or it's like, okay, I know for a fact he has Gul'dan. I need to really respect his turn 10 and win the game before then. Or save Psychic Scream for Gul'dan. That sort of thing. And in a class like Priest, where most of your cards are reactionary, Priest hasn't necessarily been playing reactionary style lately, but historically speaking, a more control-based class that has so much reactionary stuff, knowing what to have on hold and save for those big cards that you know are in your opponent's hand is a huge asset. It's just so valuable to know, man, I really got to hold Psychic Scream, or I really need that Shadow Word Pain because I know he has a busted 3-attack card in his hand. There are just so many different ways to take that information as Priest and then leverage it into powerful plays. You might also get to a scenario where you're playing against, an aggro deck. They only have 1 or 2 cards in hand. You could know everything they have and make a perfect game plan to counter that. Now, that said, there are some sacrifices with Chameleos. First and foremost is that he does kind of steal a card from your draw if you're keeping him in your hand and never utilizing him. It's essentially 1 less card of flexibility you have throughout the course of the game. But that said, in an emergency, you can also use the card Chameleos has turned into. And sometimes, in fact, it might not be in an emergency. It might be a super valuable card. You might hit that Druid's Ultimate Infestation and be like, okay, time to use you, Chameleos, because this is like the best card of the game. I'm going to get tons of value off of you now. Other times it might be stuff you don't really need, but you'll always have that choice. You'll always have that as a luxury. You can choose to use it in a pinch. If it's a rogue and you desperately need removal and you happen to have Milespine Slayer, hey, maybe it's time to drop Chameleos, right? But you don't have to. You could also just bank it as that informational asset. So because of that incredible flexibility, the informational advantage, that Chameleos provides in a class in particular that can really use that information very successfully. I personally think this is a fantastic card. I think it's going to be played in any control style priest, any priest that's slower, that's not initiative or board based. So maybe not spiteful or big priest archetypes like we've seen in the past, but any priest that's looking to go a little longer, has more removal options in their deck. Chameleos is absolutely perfect for that style of play, and it could just be a huge tool in those decks to counter everything their opponent does. I also love this from a design direction. Essentially, Hearthstone is so random, so unpredictable. This gives players who are paying attention, watching closely, who value information, a really nice tool to let their skill shine and to show off. Like, you finally have the information you need to become a better player and utilize that information to make smart, sound, strategic plays, which isn't always possible in Hearthstone. So I think among high skill cap players in particular, Chameleos will be really popular in like the tournament meta, for instance. It just makes way too much sense in that environment, but I also think it'll be fantastic on ladder. This is my favorite card so far. Love that Hearthstone is encouraging skill-based play. I think it's going to be great for good players. I think it's going to be a great control card anyway. Absolutely adore Chameleos. So now let's talk about another priest legendary. Both of these were revealed. And for this one, you might want to get your pitchforks ready. Because the early reactions I read to Lady in White, it seems like most people think this card is going to be absolutely fantastic. It almost has like 5-star ratings on a couple sites I checked. I think most people think this is like the best card of the set so far. I do not think that. I think it's good. I think it's okay, I guess I should even say. Certainly don't think it's nearly as good as Chameleos, nor do I think it will be played in every kind of priest deck. So let's talk about Lady in White. This is a 6-mana 5/5 priest legendary. The battle cry reads, cast Inner Fire on every minion or in your deck. Or essentially what that means is just set the attack to the health value of all of the minions in your deck. And I think the easiest comparison for this card to make is right away is something like the Mist Caller, the old card we saw in the past. It was a 6-mana 4/4 that essentially put the Camellias buff on every minion in your deck. And that was never played in Shaman. It was just way too slow. 6-mana 4/4 is a really punishing stat line. It took a long time to get the value. And the value, even when you got it, wasn't huge. Unlike Camellias, which came out earlier and could make a bigger influence faster, and in fact could combo with things like Shadow Step to make it even bigger influence. Unlike that, the Mist Caller just didn't work out nearly as well. Now, Lady in White certainly has some advantages over the Mist Caller. It's not a direct comparison. First off, her stat line is much, much better. It's vastly more important to have 5 attack and 5 health than 4 and 4. That just lines up so much better in Hearthstone. So that's a huge plus in her advantage, or on her side. On top of that, casting Inner Fire on minions in your deck is usually going to be worth more in stats than the Mist Caller. The Mist Caller is really only worth a total of +2 stats. If you build your deck correctly to support Lady in White, you could get minions that are getting +4, +6, +10. Like, you could go crazy as far as the total stat gain. And of course, adding attack to things can be really valuable. So Lady in White is quite obviously better than something like the Mist Caller, which is good because that card was unplayably bad, much to my dismay and against my original prediction for it. But that said, I still see some big problems for Lady in White. And there are essentially 2 ways you could build a deck to support this card. First and foremost, you could run cards that are strictly there because of their synergy with Lady in White. Stuff like, for instance, Mogashan Warden, a card that you would never otherwise run, but suddenly becomes a 4-mana 7/7 taunt thanks to Lady in White. And you could build your deck out where you've got a ton of minions with low attack and high health and try to make that work. I think pretty clearly and quickly and obviously it will become apparent that that's the wrong way to do it, because that is 100% dependent on the fact that you draw Lady in White and you're able to play Lady in White safely immediately. That's the only way that style of play would work. And otherwise, you're stuck with a bunch of Mogashan Wardens that are just terrible cards. So I'm removing that as an option right away. I think the smarter and more reasonable and more likely to succeed way to build Lady in White is to put her in a basically slower priest deck, a more control style priest deck that just happens to have minions with much higher health totals. You can think about cards like Ysera, for instance. That's sort of a card you kind of like to run in priest anyway. It's a 12 health minion. suddenly becomes 12 attack minion as well, thanks to Lady in White. So in other words, you use Lady in White as kind of an extra passive benefit as opposed to a centerpiece for your deck. Because fundamentally the problem with a card like Lady in White is that you're not guaranteed to draw her. She could be card number 30 and you get 0 benefits out of her. So your deck needs to be self-sufficient beyond that. That's the biggest hurdle here at making her work in a strictly designed deck for her. So it has to be passive, it has to be secondary, has to be considered a bonus effect as opposed to a central theme. But even then, I still don't think Lady in White is awesome. She's okay. I'm not saying this is a terrible card, so keep your pitchfork at like half-mast. I think I'll probably end up giving her 3 stars for the record if you're curious. And the reason for that is because even when you play this on turn 6, say you curve out perfectly and you have time to play her. In other words, you're not dead to aggro, so she doesn't need to have taunt. You have a little window to play her safely. Even then, when everything lines up perfectly, it takes a really long time to get the value out of a card like Lady in White, because she does not affect the cards in your hand, okay? So none of the stuff you're sitting on is going to be good yet. And those cards all lost the benefit to Lady in White. And then you're only theoretically drawing 1 card per turn to put those Lady in White stats into effect. So it can take a really long time for this extra damage value to snowball into something considerable or something that impacts the game in any significant way. Unlike a card like Prince Keleseth, which those stats start hitting really fast and really early because it comes so quickly in the game, Lady in White takes a lot longer to really showcase the value. On top of that, if you're playing this in a slower priest deck, essentially that means half your deck is probably spells anyway, because you're not going to be a minion-based deck. Of course, there are minions in every control deck. You need threats, you need pressure, but a lot of it's going to be spells. So depending on how you draw your cards, and even once you play Lady in White, the next 3 cards you draw might be spells. So it takes basically forever to get some sort of Lady in White value. And then at the end of the day, in a control matchup, is that extra attack all that significant? Sometimes, but you know, a 12-12 dies to Siphon Soul just as easily as a 4-12, right? There are single target hard removal cards in Hearthstone. Sometimes that attack just doesn't add up to enough. So to me, I mean, clearly this card does something directionally good. It makes all your minions better, and that's a great thing. But when I start to put it into practice and think about who's playing this, how quickly is it affecting the game, how big of an impact is it going to have in control versus control matchups, I see some really big gaps for Lady in White to jump over to find success. So I do not think this is the best card of the set yet, like some people have said, and apparently everybody thinks it's like a 5-star card. I don't think it's going to work nearly so well. I think there are a lot of challenges for it. So to me, Lady in the White is still okay. She's fine, just not amazing. Okay, so up next, let's talk about the new Warrior legendary minion. You know, Warrior has gotten some storied Warcraft lore characters. We had Grom Hellscream. We had Varian Wrynn. But this one probably takes the cake. The most famous of all Warcraft characters, the Blackhowl Gunspire. Oh, wait, that's not a famous character? No, I have no idea what this is. I don't know why this is a legendary character. It looks like a tower, I guess, in Gilneas that has a bunch of cannons. For some reason, I suppose that deserves a titled name and a legendary gem. Who knows? I don't know why they couldn't have named this any other character or made something up that was, you know, at least humanoid. I think that would have been much, much cooler. This is like the lamest legendary name to me. But that's okay. The merits of the card are not based upon its art or name. So Blackhowl Gunspire is a 7-mana 3/8 minion here. It can't attack, so it's got the Ragnaros treatment. And it also reads, whenever this minion takes damage, deal 3 damage to a random enemy. So once again here we have a new Warrior Whirlwind Synergy style card. We also have gotten some Whirlwind cards in Witchwood so far with things like Warpath / Forest Fire, as I like to call it. And clearly, if this worked out to perfection and you played a Blackhowl Gunspire and then the next turn you Warpathed, 5 times, for instance, you could wreak a lot of havoc with this effect, because 3 damage hitting the board over and over again does start to add up. It's going to chip away at your opponent's health total. It's going to kill some minions here and there, particularly in combination with all the whirlwinds going off. That's a lot of utility. That's a lot of power. It can do some pretty cool stuff. But I basically described the perfect scenario there, where you play Blackhowl Gunspire, it sits there uncontested, and then the following turn you have all the whirlwind synergies in the world to take advantage of its effect. And at a base level, the max value that Blackhowl Gunspire can attain is basically 24 damage to either minions or your opponent's face, because it has 8 health. 8 times 3 is 24. And if that all hit face and you could do it in one turn, like, that'd be super scary. That's like 3 Ragnaros hits, right? But of course, it's going to be really hard, as far as I'm concerned, to get multiple whirlwinds out of Blackhowl Gunspire to make it work. I think that's just a big challenge, because this is a 7 mana card in its own right. That's very expensive. If you're playing that even super late in the game, you only have 3 mana reserve, essentially, left to whirlwind with. So it's not going to get a lot of instant, immediate value the turn it hits the board. If it does live through the turn, which is always a possibility, because your opponent won't want to trade into it. So in a minion-based deck, it could really stick around. And then you start to see the value turning. It makes a little more sense. But in any sort of control environment, this is just Shadow Word Pain fodder, basically. It's any kind of single target removal fodder. It's just going to die without actually attaining any sort of value. And that's a really slow and hard thing to do in a card at 7 mana. It's going to be in slower decks, probably. Maybe it could be like the top end in a Whirlwind / Enrage, mid-rangey, damage-based warrior. That's a possibility. But I think it looks to me like much more of a defensive card. Now, if you could give this thing Taunt with like a Bone Mare, suddenly it gets a little spicier. You can start to see some crazy potential there. If your opponent has to trade 7 Silverhand Recruits into this thing, it's going to get much, much more value. But since it can't attack, you can't really force their hand, so it is reliant on having you activate it via Whirlwind. So if you play this, but you don't have the necessary Whirlwinds in hand, if your opponent ignores it, suddenly it just falls completely short. It doesn't do anything at all. And that's a very bad thing in Hearthstone, spending 7 mana on a really, really delayed return of value. It might take 3 or 4 turns to make this thing worth it. And that's probably just too slow and too risky as far as I'm concerned. So I see some things to like here, but it seems like it's just going to require too many cards, too many synergies, too much support to empower this card. It just doesn't do anything on its own. That's a major problem. If it had Taunt, it'd be maybe too good, too busted. So I'm sure that's why they couldn't do that. So ultimately, from a flavor standpoint, kind of boring. From a power level standpoint, pretty weak, I'd say. Definitely not my favorite card from the Witchwood. That honor still belongs to Chameleos. Okay, so up next here we have the Cursed Castaway, a new rogue pirate. It is a 6 mana 5/3 with Rush. A lot of Rush cards in the set so far. And it has Death Rattle. Draw a combo card from your deck. So right off the bat, a couple synergies there you can consider for this card. It's got Death Rattle. Rogue has some Death Rattle stuff going on. It's a pirate. Rogue still has some pirate possibilities. Has the Rush there for the instant value. And it even synergizes with combo cards. Hey, that's another Rogue keyword. What do you know? Despite all those potential angles for this card to find some sort of avenue to play, I still don't think it's going to be played very much. First and foremost, it's a 3 health minion, so even though it has Rush, it's very unlikely that it's going to be able to trade into something in a post-turn 6 environment and hang around. And then even if it does trade into something and hang around, you probably didn't kill the most high-value thing at turn 6, 7, 8, etc. Now, there are some really picky examples you could go through that everybody's going to say, Regis, you could kill their Tundra Rhino, and it would be the perfect play. Yes, you're right. That one example out of the 700 minions in Hearthstone is perfect, but there are so many others that are terrible, including the onslaught of 3/3s that seem to exist in Hearthstone at all times. So most of the time, a vast majority of the time, in fact, I think this is probably taking unfavorable trades with its Rush effect. And if you do find the favorable trade, you've probably left something more important or more valuable on the board, which can cause a huge problem. So I really think you almost have to think about this more like a targeted spell almost, as opposed to a minion that gets a value trade. If it had 4 health, yes, you could get way more value trades, but at 3, it just doesn't do it. So I think the example most people are citing here to compare this card to is something like Druid's Starfire, where you deal 5 damage to something and you draw a card. And that's exactly how Cursed Castaway could work. You could do 5 damage to a minion and then draw a card. Not just any card, though, a combo card, which is a bit of a tutor, which means drawing a specific targeted thing out of your deck. And that's pretty good. Like, you could put in, for instance, another combo set like Elven Minstrel, where you know that you're going to turn this card draw into more card draw, and that's really cool. You could also just look for, I don't know, Edwin or SI7. Most combo cards in Rogue are good, and you can ensure that you only ran good combo cards, or really powerful swingy combo cards, to set up specific sorts of things. So yes, there's some upside there. The other problem, though, or the problems really comparing this to Starfire, number one, it can't go face the turn it's played like Starfire can. Secondly, it can't move through taunts like Starfire can. So if your opponent has a board that is resilient or resistant to Cursed Castaway, the value is reduced immensely. And because of that sort of choke where you don't always do what you want with Cursed Castaway, I do feel like it's going to be stranded in your hand fairly often, which is kind of hilarious because it's a Castaway. It's been stranded. This ghost has been stranded, and it's going to be Castaway in your hand as well. So to me, I don't think this one's going to make the cut. It seems like it has too many problems and just doesn't look strong enough or swingy enough. Doesn't look like it does quite enough. Now, maybe if some Death Rattle deck shows up or some crazy pirate deck is there that buffs pirates, sure, it has possibilities. It's not absolutely terrible by any means. I just don't think it's the kind of card that'll see play. So now let's talk about another rogue card here. This is Cheap Shot, a new spell. It has Echo, like so many other 2-mana Echo spells. Apparently, practically every class is going to get some super cheap Echo like this. And this one deals 2 damage to a minion. So it's a bit like your Backstab, right? Except it doesn't have to be an undamaged minion. It can do it to any minion. So maybe a bit more like Jade Shuriken that doesn't summon a Jade. As you start to compare it to all the other, 2 damage spells Rogue has available, you can see weaker than Backstab, weaker than Jade Shuriken, weaker than Eviscerate because it doesn't have the combo potential to do more. And that makes sense because it has Echo, so that's its upside. So yes, at a fundamental level, as a singular unit, it's worse than all those other options. But the Echo gives it, of course, extra depth and extra flexibility because suddenly it can be a 6-mana deal 6, which Eviscerate can never be. It can even be a 10-mana deal 10. That's, the Forbidden Flame treatment, essentially, where depending on what you need at any given moment, it can serve that utility. Beyond that, it's also a great combo setup card. You can do things like get a big Edwin. You can play 3 cheap shots to help buff your Edwin, and you've got a pretty decent play. Deal 6 and summon an 8/8 Edwin. That's pretty good. Maybe even bigger if you've got other stuff. And then, of course, beyond that, it's also not a bad Gadget Zan Auctioneer card either. Like, yes, the turn you play Gadget Zan, you're probably not going to be able to get much cheap shot Echo value because you just run out of mana really quickly. But if you manage to stick an Auctioneer on the board, and you can cycle Cheap Shot multiple times in the following turn, then it looks a lot better. And of course, you can always run Preparation to make it cheaper as well. So I do see a couple paths for this thing to find some play. It could just be that flexible removal card that sets up combos, that does whatever you need it to in a pinch. It's got the spell synergies, which are nice. Now, I still think from a raw power level standpoint, it's not amazing. It's not better than other cards by any means. It does fall a little bit short there. It can't go face, which can be problematic for Rogue as well. So it's not going to be a one-of in every deck. It's not super high power level by any means. Just an okay card that occasionally a deck might find some use for, particularly if they like spell synergies or cycling through a ton of stuff to empower other things. It's an engine almost that makes that Auctioneer, makes that Edwin slightly better in some scenarios. Now, there might be alternatives to this that end up being way better, so Cheap Shot doesn't make the cut, but I think it has the potential. It's completely fine. It's an okay card. So now let's talk about the last card here. This is Paladin's Sound the Bells, a 2-mana Echo card once again. And this one gives a minion +1/+2 for 2 mana. So it's basically Divine Strength, the 1-mana +1/+2 card, but it costs 2 mana because, of course, you get the upside of Echo. You can repeat this thing over and over again. So essentially, best case scenario, you get 5 Sound the Bells off in a single turn, and you buff a minion +5, +10. Now, that's not a bad buff, right? But not worth 10 mana, typically. And you'll note that this is not the most efficient card from a stat standpoint. If it was like a +2/+2, it would look a little bit more efficient. I designed a card pretty similar to this. I think mine was essentially +2 attack and Divine Shield, so a similar idea. You can't find a perfect line where it doesn't become too powerful. So Blizzard sided on the side of making it not quite powerful enough, I'd say, to be safe, which is fine. That's a reasonable decision for them. Now, that means basically that I don't think the average Paladin deck ever wants to run this. On turn 2, for instance, it's a fairly weak play. Even on turn 4, it's a fairly weak play, worse than something like Blessing of Kings. On 6, it's worse than Spike Ridge Steed. Basically, there's no mana point or situation where this seems to line up perfectly, and I don't think the flexibility of being able to fill out your curve makes it worth it for something like Sound the Bells. But, of course, there is one scenario, one environment, one deck that might love a card like this, and it's the very reason I designed a similar card myself, and that is Quest Paladin. Quest Paladin has never really found any success. Yes, a handful of people have played it, sure, but it's never been a high-tier competitive deck across all of Hearthstone, because finding enough buffs and consistency of buffs without running out of cards was always a real challenge. Yes, you could run a ton of cheap buffs, but then you'd always run out of cards. Your hand would be empty and you'd fall flat. Even if you managed to get Galvadon on the board, you just wouldn't have enough there, enough strength, enough oomph to push through for the rest of the game. And Sound the Bells essentially solves that problem because it gives you multiple buffs in a single card draw. So you don't have to sacrifice your entire hand to get Sound the Bells to activate your quest and get your Galvadon. So if you get to turn 6, you have 3 activations, boom, Sound the Bells, you're done, you get the quest, yippee. And that will add to the consistency of Quest Paladin, undoubtedly. But of course, that doesn't mean Quest Paladin's going to be a good deck. It's so far from strong now, the power level might not be there, even with something like Sound the Bells. So although I like that this exists to empower a long-forgotten legendary card and even an archetype, I don't think that'll necessarily be enough to pull it into relevance. There's a lot of holes in Quest Paladin that Sound the Bells just doesn't fix. So pretty limited utility in normal play, I think. Some utility, of course, in Quest, but the potential for that to succeed is so small. I don't think you're going to be seeing Sound the Bells very often in Hearthstone. And there you have it, folks. That's it for my detailed reviews. Some pretty crazy stuff there. Handful of, middling cards, but I love Chameleos. A lot of power level there. A lot of people like Lady in White, so maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe she'll be amazing. So pretty exciting nonetheless. Cool designs, regardless of their power level, which is always a good sign. So now what I'd like to do is jump into my quick reviews. Chameleos is a 5-star card. Lady in White is a 3-star card. Blackhowl Gunspire is a 2-star card. Cursed Castaway is a 2-star card. Cheap Shot is a 3-star card. Sound the Bells is a 2-star card. Okay, guys, part 8 of the Witchwood review is done. So now it's time to share your thoughts. Why do you love Lady in White? Why are you kind of meh on Chameleos? What else did I get wrong? What else did I get right? Share it on the comments below. I love hearing what you guys have to say. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.